Welcome to The Riser. This is a brand new podcast where we're going to talk Canadian sports, media, and share stories from over a quarter century in the biz. I'm Greg Strong of the Canadian Press, here along with longtime post-media scribe Ted Wyman. Ted, here we are. We finally got her going. The Riser, it's happening.
It absolutely is. I'm so happy that we're getting it off the ground. It's been just a blast to plan it out and get things started here, Greg. And you and I, of course, have had years of basically sitting on press tribunes, or risers, as you might call them, at places like the Olympics, at curling events, hockey, all over the place. And we've always had our debates, right? This is what we do. We sit in these press boxes and we talk about sports and of course about the media landscape and that kind of thing. And I think both of us really thought it would be a great idea for us to start doing that in this podcast form.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And, when I think back to the many road trips covering sports events over the years, some of the best memories are, sharing a cab back to the media hotel and just talking sports, talking about what we just witnessed, or sitting down at the pub afterwards over a pint and just sharing stories from yesteryear, some of the things that, may not be, mentioned in a game story or in a column per se. But let's get her going, Ted, with some hot topics. What do you say?
I say I'm looking forward to getting into this. And of course, we're going to have Mike Traikos from the Hockey News come and join us a little later to talk some puck. So yeah, let's get after it.
Okay, let's start with Nathan Rourke. Ted, your thoughts? The CFL star who went south of the border hasn't really been heard from a whole lot. Certainly hasn't had a lot of playing time, but there are some developments of note. Bring us up to speed.
Yeah, I think it's pretty exciting. I think for a lot of Canadian football fans, it's that validation when you see a guy who wasn't drafted in the NFL, came up to the CFL, played, and was, he was injured in his second season in BC, but probably would have been very likely very close to being the most outstanding player of the CFL. He was having such a good year had he played all the games. And then he goes and he signs in the NFL, and he was a number 3 or number 4 quarterback with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He had an excellent preseason, really showed some things in that preseason. I think that is the reason why he ended up being a bit of a hot commodity just this last week. Because of injuries to Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville, they had to move Rourke back and forth off the practice roster. He has to be waived to do that, and he was picked up by the New England Patriots. And apparently, they outbid the Houston Texans to get him by being worse. But I think it's just a great situation for Nathan Rourke. It's pretty incredible. Like, they have terrible quarterbacks under Bill Belichick there in New England. Mac Jones has just had an awful season. He's been benched a bunch of times. I think he's been permanently benched now. And they brought in Bailey Zappi, not even much better. And honestly, now you see this opportunity. Nathan Rourke has to be on the active roster for the final 3 games of the season. That's part of the waiver claim. He's going to be dressed for these games. And I can only think that a team that's 3-11 might want to see what they have in him. So it's, in my mind, I think there's a real possibility that he's going to play in an NFL game very soon.
Man, if things changed under center for the Patriots after Tom Brady, so dominant for so long. But, it's interesting. This Rourke case kind of gets me thinking, would it be better to say make $500,000 in the CFL as a top flight guy, lead your team to playoff glory, get a ton of playing time, just doing your thing? You're a professional quarterback. Or is it better to make maybe even a little bit more money and sit on a practice roster, maybe not even get into a game over the course of a season? It's always interesting to me because it's got to be a blow to be in your prime years like Rourke is right now and not get a chance to actually show your stuff.
I've absolutely discussed this already with people, and it's like, why wouldn't Rourke come back? I'm sure the Lions would pay him $700,000, $750,000, whatever. They might even pay him $1 million, if they could figure out a way to make it work with the salary cap, because they got a Grey Cup coming up next year. They would love to have that guy on their roster, but I don't see it happening. I believe I just read that he's made $398,000 this year to be on the practice roster with the Jaguars. Now he probably would have made about 500,000 in BC. So that's not a huge difference. And the big difference is, of course, that if you find a way to make yourself into a bona fide NFL quarterback, you're going to make 10, 20 times that. And to me, this is the golden opportunity for a guy like Nathan Rourke. So he's got to stay the course. As much as I'd like to see him come back to Canada, he's got to stay the course and try to get that big payday.
There you go. Let's shift now to baseball and Canada's lone big league team, the Toronto Blue Jays, of course, looking to make some changes in the offseason after another quick playoff exit, 2 games and out for the 3rd time in 4 years. Now they've got a ton of free agents. They've got some spots to fill. And of course, Shohei Ohtani has dominated the coverage of the baseball offseason. Where was he going to go? What was going to happen? Was he on this flight to Toronto? Was he not? A really interesting and unusual case. Ted, I'm curious, how did the Blue Jays play media-wise in your market? And what did you make of the whole Shohei Ohtani situation?
Well, first off, I know this is your area of expertise as you cover the Blue Jays for the Canadian press. So I am obviously talking about it from afar. And most of my involvement with the Blue Jays is as a fan, really. I mean, that's how a lot of my friends love to sit around and watch the Blue Jays. I think they play quite well. I think they play quite well across the country. There's a lot of interest when they play in Minneapolis anytime during the regular season or even the playoffs, as was the case this year. A lot of Manitobans go, and you'll hear Dan Shulman talk about it almost every time. It's like this place is full of people from Winnipeg. So the Blue Jays are certainly a big deal. And when it comes to the Shohei situation, I mean, that honestly, I've said this before. I don't love Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I find it to be a cesspool a lot of the time, and it's not an encouraging place to be sometimes, especially as a writer. Sometimes people are taking you to task and not using such nice words. But it's on that day, I thought that was really entertaining. I thought that was a real study in people's behavior, in just how much people latched on to one small report or one little tidbit of information here or there, and then started creating their own narrative with a plane coming to Toronto and people at the airport watching out for Shohei Ohtani and people getting so excited about the fact that they might get to spend $600 to $700 million on one player. Which, hey, I'm not saying against it, because I think Shohei Ohtani is the most intriguing player that's played in 50 years in Major League Baseball. But he didn't do it. He ended up going with the Los Angeles Dodgers, who probably were his first choice all along. He may have got a few extra bucks out of him thanks to the Blue Jays.
You can really tell it's a thing when non-sports fans, when I have family members who are texting me, friends who don't follow baseball texting me like, what is going on with this Ohtani thing? They're sending me graphics of the flight, this private flight that supposedly he's on, when it's going to arrive at Pearson in Toronto. Just a really unusual situation. Actually brought me back to when Kawhi Leonard was apparently thinking about re-signing in Toronto when he was a free agent, and all the hubbub and buzz and the local news station getting the helicopter out, if he was by the airport, the whole thing. So it's really unusual. Ted, let's transition one more time. Another hot topic, curling. And of course, we have sat on the media riser at many a bonspiel over the years. This season, another season with, some significant changes at the top, some significant storylines. When you look at the first half of the season, and as we look ahead to the second half with the Scotties and the Brier coming up, what are your initial takeaways here?
Yeah, I've written more about off the ice stuff than I have about on the ice stuff. I'll tell you that much. And as you said, it's a transition year for Curling Canada. They brought in David Murdoch as the high performance director, and that didn't happen in this first half of the season. It happened last season, but he's getting to work now, and what he's doing in terms of trying to build Canada back into the curling superpower it wants to be. And I'm not saying we're not good at curling, we are, but we haven't been winning the way that we want to be winning. And so David Murdoch is trying to implement some things that worked in Scotland, which is his home country, in the past, to try to bring Canada up to speed. And of course, Curling Canada doesn't have a CEO right now because Catherine Henderson left to go to Hockey Canada. So we're waiting to see how that direction will go with that. And I thought another really interesting thing that happened was Laura Walker, who's been a good four-player curler and a very good mixed doubles curler with her partner Kirk Myers. Those two really pushing to try to get to the Olympics in 2026. But she was named to the Curling Canada Board of Governors. And I think to have an athlete named to that board is going to be a really big move for curling, because if there's one thing you hear when you talk to the curlers is they just don't feel like they have enough of a voice, that they're not being heard by the World Curling Federation. They're not being heard.
Yeah, interesting to see some steps made on that front with Laura. Also, there's so many storylines in curling. It's just a bounty of riches there when it comes to that. And of course, there's talk of the Players Association, and that still hasn't been finalized and appears like it might be off track altogether. We recall a few weeks back, some of the competitors at the Grand Slam just got together on their own and went to the Sportsnet Grand Slam organizers and addressed some things they wanted to tackle, and they were able to get some results. So that's kind of an interesting one. Interesting to me too. You mentioned the changes at Curling Canada. The new CEO is going to have a lot on the plate, no doubt about it. Kind of on the front burner is, how is Canada going to start getting results at major international competitions? They have been shut out from the top step of the podium at the Olympics going back to 2014 in the four-player team disciplines. The last men's world title, I believe, was 2017, Brad Gushue winning in Edmonton. And I believe it was the following year, 2018, was the last women's world title, Jennifer Jones winning in North Bay. That's a long time for a country that's used to owning the top step and certainly winning gold fairly often. It's just not happening anymore. So how do you fix that? That's, obviously a top priority for the HPD and for Curling Canada brass. But there are several interesting storylines. One, to me, that immediately jumped out this season is the attendance issue. And we saw it at the first season of Champions event, the PointsBet Invitational. The final weekend there featured some of the top Canadian teams in the game. Brad Gushue, Carrie Anderson, Matt Dunstone, go down the list. And it looked like a pandemic style setup there with maybe a couple dozen fans in an arena that seats over 1,000. It's been a problem for a little while. Ted, is there an easy fix on that one?
I find it hard to really get too worked up about the attendance until we actually see what it's like at the Scotties and Briar, because those are obviously the biggest events that Curling Canada puts on during the year and in the biggest arenas. So got to hold judgment on that a little bit. But I don't know. I mean, the bigger concern for me with curling isn't so much that attendance. It's that this sport has become so difficult to get anywhere. Like you can start out and you can play, you can be a recreational player. If to join that elite group at the top to try to compete for the Olympics is an unbelievable journey. And there's so many people in the mid-range in that sport that are not getting the opportunities right now. And that's where there's a bit of a problem, because I think it's showing up. Just in Manitoba alone, just recently, there was a regional playdowns for the provincial championship. It's a big provincial championship. There's 32 teams in it. And there was 20 zone playdowns. For those 20 zone playdowns, a total of 36 teams entered. I mean, that is just not even close to what you'd expect. And from what I was told by some people, it's like there are people that are saying, well, why would I enter that? I mean, I literally have no chance of winning the provincial championship, and I probably wouldn't want to, because if I'm not at the level of Brad Gushue and Brendan Botcher and whoever else, if I get to the Briar, I'm not going to be able to compete with them. The place where people who aren't as accomplished or aren't accomplished enough to play in the Grand Slams, they're all going away. There's just not a lot of those mid-range tournaments. There's not a lot of places for everyone to play. Even the top curlers are saying, well, we always have to travel because there's nothing local for so many people.
Yeah, and that's obviously an interesting storyline for sure. I'm also interested in the what's happening at the very top, and Canada is not number one in the men's and women's world rankings right now. That's Switzerland's Silvana Tirinzoni, and on the men, Joel Retornaz from Italy. Uh, and of course, we've seen more international teams in the Grand Slam circuit than perhaps ever before. I looked at the last one, the Masters, earlier this month, and there were, let's see, what were they? 18 teams. It was, I believe, 6 Canadian teams in each pool of 16 teams. So that's, normally, when you look back at the Grand Slams of yesteryear, you're looking at the majority of them being Canadian teams.
And it's the same teams every time, too. It's not like someone else is swapping in who is a little bit below and getting that opportunity, because half of those, well, not half, but a good third of the spots are going to European teams.
Right. So what's interesting to me is, why are these international teams taking it to that next level? And are the Canadian teams, are they stuck? It kind of seems like they're stuck. But to me, what's interesting is, we know that a lot of these international teams are quote unquote professional curlers. They do this for a living. They have different funding setups. They are fully devoted to it. They're not juggling a full-time job or a part-time job or 30 hours a week. They are locked in many cases centralized, in many cases practicing together for 4 or 5 hours a day, doing things together as a team and as a unit. And that does happen in some cases here in Canada, but you can look at the top teams. A lot of them are it's a juggling act. And I'm wondering, at what point does that juggling act need to end if Canada is going to hang with international teams that just keep getting better for the reasons I stated?
Well, I don't know how this happened that we ended up having our longest discussion about curling. That never happens with us. Yeah. But yeah, you're going to get a variety of things on this podcast, and curling definitely will be one of them. One angle that I've been exploring this year is the incredible disparity in the number of games played by international teams compared to Canadian teams. So when Rachel Homan was in the Masters final in Saskatoon, she was playing against Tirinzoni. And Tirinzoni's team was playing something like their 71st game of the season. And Homan was playing her 36th. And I read up on other teams, some of the Korean teams, 81 games already, 75 games already. In Canada, the most had been by Jennifer Jones at 50. She definitely likes to play more. But it's just interesting, right? Because we see these European teams and international teams getting to the Worlds and being so powerfully strong.
All right. Excellent run through on the hot topics. And we were thrilled now to have our first guest on the riser, and none other than Mike Traikos, the director of digital media for the Hockey News, is joining us now for a little hockey talk. Mike, welcome to the program.
Hey guys, how you doing? Happy to be on this podcast.
Guest number 1.
There you go. Can only go downhill from here, right? Or I mean uphill.
Well, I don't know. It's one of those two things, but I'm going to go with the first one you said, because we're pretty happy to have you here to talk about some hockey.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that we're already past the quarter mark. But yeah, with the holiday season coming up, there's a holiday freeze right now in the NHL. And, we're starting to get that sense of who the contenders are, who the pretenders are. And, I don't know, we've already seen, I think, like 3 or 4 coaches get fired. So, you're in the thick of things when, bodies are going down left and right.
Who are the pretenders and the contenders?
Well, it's funny because I'm looking at the standings right now, and, going into the season, I did not expect the Vancouver Canucks to be a Stanley Cup threat. I didn't even know if they were a playoff team. And here we are. They're looking like, them alongside Winnipeg, who again, I wasn't sure what to expect, but those 2 teams out of the West, I'm confident that both of them are going to be playoff teams this year. More confident the Vancouver Canucks are, probably because of the division they're in. It's a little bit more watered down than anyone really kind of thought. But the fact that, the Canucks are doing so well is a bit of a surprise. The fact that the Jets are still hanging around after what we saw last year is a bit of a surprise. And then you look at the East, and the Toronto Maple Leafs are what they are. I think they're going to be a team that makes the playoffs. Are they going to be a Stanley Cup threat? I still think they have way too many warts, but of those three teams, I think one of them is kind of expected, but then the other teams are unexpected. And, we're going to talk about the Edmonton Oilers, hopefully, about what their season has been. But right now, it doesn't look like they're going to be where anyone thought they'd be.
Mike, if we could, let's dig a little bit into your personal background. Of course, had a long career at Post Media, now with the Hockey News, and have covered a variety of sports. But how did you get into the hockey thing?
Yeah, I could have been a short track speed skating beat reporter, but just the market wasn't there, unfortunately. How did I start? I went to Ryerson for the journalism program. I never thought I was going to be a sports reporter, to be honest, Greg. When I was at Ryerson, I was also interning at the Toronto Star, working in what was called the radio room. So essentially a crime reporter / obituary writer. I thought for sure I'd be one of those guys that, gets sent over to kind of like war-torn countries and reports on, whatever the catastrophe of the day is. Day before I started with the National Post as a news reporter, I got a call from the sports editor saying, hey, I know you got designs on being a news reporter, but would you like to shift gears and would you like to write sports for us this summer? And it might sound like a dream, but initially I was like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be stuck writing sports. I want it to be a A1 front page kind of guy. But then, talking to some folks in sports, they said, listen, this is going to be a great chance to get some real clippings. You're going to be doing some feature writing. And I accepted the position. And lo and behold, like 20 years later, I'd spent 2 decades in sports and haven't looked back. So
a quick follow, if I could, Mike, how has the hockey media scene changed in those 20 years in the biz for you?
I want to say like it's changed dramatically, but to be honest, Greg, even when I got into hockey dressing rooms, and my first dressing rooms with the Leafs was like Pat Quinn was the coach, Matt Sundin was the captain. You had some older players like Darcy Tucker was there, Ty Domi was there. I think I missed that period where players and media were a little bit more friendlier with one another. I had cell phones for a number of older players, but it was at the era where like the Kyle Wellwoods, the Matt Stagens, the Alex Deans were coming in. And those guys were kind of that new school of they had been media trained. They had been told, hey, you don't become friends with the media. You keep them at an arm's length. So I was already kind of in that transition period. And then we look at where we are now, and all it's done is just it's closed off even more doors.
That's cool insight, Mike. We really appreciate that. And, obviously we've experienced some of the same things as you over long careers in the business. But I'm really interested in some news that came up very recently, and that's the announcement that Canada is going to go back to the Olympics in 2026 to Milan. It's going to be pretty special for hockey fans because it's been a long wait since 2014.
It has been a long wait, and I would love to just see McDavid and Crosby be teammates. That's something that we haven't seen, that kind of one generation to another. Like last time they played on international ice together was a World Cup where McDavid was, the centerpiece and captain of a U23 team, basically a gimmick team between Canada and the US. I'm still not sold though, Ted. You're saying like it's a slam dunk thing. It's going to happen in 2026. Until they're actually on the ice, until they're actually in Milan, I'm not convinced that that's the route that we're going to go down. Obviously, before that, we're probably going to get a World Cup or two. Even that, like right now, like I was doing some prep work for the World Juniors, and not to have Russia in the World Juniors, it takes away a little bit of the competition factor because Russian players are so strong. And when we're talking about the Olympics, like I hope everything gets settled between Russia and the Ukraine, just from selfishly a hockey fan, like I can't imagine going into an Olympics where we don't have Ovechkin and Panarin and there's just Kucherov. There's just so many talented Russians. Like you look at the scoring leaders right now, you look at the best goaltenders in the world, and they're all Russian. So
just to follow up quickly there, just off of something you said, when you're a little bit trepidatious about the NHL actually coming through and having these events, the international warm-ups, getting into the Olympics, don't you think the NHL needs that? Like, to me, it seems like the NHL is lagging behind. The NBA's got this in-season tournament.
Yeah, like whether you think that the Olympics are going to be that thing that draws in fans, like you can make that argument, obviously. But like whether it's an in-season tournament or I think the easiest one is a World Cup. The NHL can control when it schedules it. It can control all the licensing and the TV rights. And I think that's been the biggest impediment to having the NHLers at the Olympics is that lack of control, not being able to, show highlight packages on their websites, having basically a tournament disrupt the season. You got to remember, like the NBA, when they have NBA players at Olympics, it's not at a time when the NBA is in the mix of its season. It's in the summer, which, it is a perfect scenario for the NBA, whereas the NHL, you're talking about, basically, halting the season at a time where the NHL is basically controlling the market to a degree. There's several factors kind of hurting it, but yeah, I'm with you, Ted.
Well, great to talk NHL and Olympics 2026 Milan. There's another league on the horizon here, the PWHL, going to drop the puck on its inaugural campaign New Year's Day. Mike, what's your take on this new league, the lead up to day one, and is this going to fly? Is this league going to work?
Yeah, it's already a bunch of stumbling blocks there, Greg. It feels very rushed. Like I know women's hockey wants to get things going and going proper, but they come out with the team names and everything from like the jerseys seemed like it was last minute. Now there's reports that players haven't been paid. It just seems like every time they take one step forward, there's always like two steps back. I was reading a story about season tickets already are dramatically or significantly lower than they imagine they would. I think all of us love the idea of women's hockey and want to see a proper league in the same way that the WNBA is alongside the NBA, and there seems to be that union there where one hand is feeding the other. This one, it seems like it's going to be a disaster, and unfortunately, I don't see it being a success. I think this is going to be one of those ones where I wouldn't be surprised if things get shut down before the season. Maybe even the season begins, but I wouldn't be surprised if the season gets halted somehow during the middle of it, and they either run out of money or run out of fan support. But yeah, I'm very skeptical of this thing.
Well, Mike, let's put a bow on it. We'll appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join us here on the Riser, and we look forward to seeing you when the Maple Leafs and Winnipeg Jets are playing in the Stanley Cup final in a few months' time.
You guys.
Thanks for joining us, Mike. That was a blast.
Thank you, Mike. All right, shifting to the all-timers portion of the pod here, Ted. And, thinking back to covering all sorts of things in the sports world, whether it be NHL, baseball, soccer, 10-pin bowling at the Pan Am Games, whatever it might be, luckily had a chance to cover a wide variety of sports. Grateful for that. Ted, when you think back to your quarter century plus in the media biz and a lot of sports coverage along the way, is there one story that is like a go-to story for you that you're like, wow, I can't believe I covered that, or this was a really interesting interaction? What jumps out?
Well, you put me on the spot a bit because it's hard to think of one in particular. I've had an incredible opportunity to work with a lot of great journalists, get to sit next to you on media benches all the time. So there's one. But it was 2014, and I got to cover my very first Olympics, and this was in Sochi, Russia, which of course you were there as well, Greg, and it was really an interesting setup, very unusual. And we obviously got to know a lot of the other media, fortunately, because we were kind of really crammed into a media village. All these restaurant bars were right there. So we got to know each other really well. And I loved my opportunity to meet and get to know some of the other media at that particular event. And I had the great fortune of covering the curling at that Olympics. And of course, that was a gold medal for Brad Jacobs, and it was a gold medal for Jennifer Jones. It was two really incredible feats, the best that has happened in curling in this country ever. And it drew the attention of a lot of other media that weren't necessarily curling writers like you and I. And I sat down at my spot. I picked a great spot behind the sheet, and along comes an absolute idol of mine, Roy McGregor. And he comes up behind me and says, well, somebody said I should sit next to you, Chet, because you're the guy that knows about curling. So I sat there next to this absolute icon of Canadian sports writing, a fantastic author, if you ever get a chance to read anything by him. And he's, peppering me with questions about how to properly cover a curling event. And I thought, this is really quite incredible. I mean, I'm kind of humbled that I get this opportunity to share with him. And I even played him a song, Tournament of Hearts by the Weakerthans, on my phone. He'd never heard it before. He didn't believe me when I said there's a song about curling. There really is. And it's a great song. If you've never heard it, it's an absolutely great song. And I just love that interaction with Roy. And I'll tell you, it wasn't long after that, a couple of weeks, that I got a call from a publishing house in Toronto, and they asked me if I'd be interested in writing a book for them about the two Canadian curlers, which I did. It's called Ice Gold. It's about Jennifer Jones's team and Brad Jacobs' team. And they never told me exactly who it was, but they said, one of our authors recommended you. And I'm pretty sure that was Roy McGregor. So that's my favorite story on that one.
My story, you'd think maybe it'd be like NBA Finals or Stanley Cup or whatever, but no, I'm going to go take the listeners and viewers into the weeds a little bit here. And my interaction in 2008 was at the Beijing Olympics. And I was, as you know, at an Olympics, especially a Summer Olympics, you often get assigned to sports you wouldn't normally cover. And on this particular day, I was assigned to cover wrestling. And at that time, Carol Wynn was competing that morning at a venue about 2 hours outside of Beijing. And we go through the preliminary rounds, and she qualifies for the next, for later in the afternoon. So great. I went and talked to her briefly. And broadcasters, I do a little bit of broadcasting with my work at the People's Wire service. Nothing blows the credibility faster than a blown pronouncer. And Carol Wynn's last name, I don't have it in front of me here, but I believe it's Hunyh. So at first glance, that surname would trip some people up. How do you pronounce it properly? And so when you have that situation, you have to go to the source. So down I go from the media riser, and I go to a little mix zone area where we interview the athletes. And Carol's whipping through. She's going to rest before her upcoming bouts. And I said, real quick, I go, Carol, how do you pronounce your last name? And she goes, Win, like victory. And sure enough, she goes on. And later in the day, of course, a whole bunch of Canadian reporters joined me there. They weren't there for the prelims. I remember I had to go and kill a couple hours, and I went and had a wonderful bowl of turtle soup, of all things. But then go back to the venue, and everyone's there, and she went on and won the gold medal, completed that win, got I think a surprise gold for many in the biz. They weren't really expecting a gold medal that day on the wrestling mat, but Carol Wynn got it. And that was my memorable interaction, win like victory. So nice. There we go. Ted, a real pleasure to get episode number 1 in the can here, The Riser. We've been talking about this for a few years. So thanks to producer Alex as well.
Hey, thanks for the shout out, guys. And a fine episode, if I do say so myself.
This has been very enjoyable, and look forward to many more in the future.